Captain David Hayes had been alone in space for 23 days. 23 days of silence. 23 days of nothing but the hum of his ship's life support systems and the cold, infinite darkness outside his viewport. This was salvage work. Not the glamorous kind you read about in adventure stories. Not the kind where daring captains found ancient alien treasures or discovered lost civilizations. This was the boring kind. The hard kind. The kind that paid just enough to keep flying but never enough to get rich. David was 54 years old. He had spent most of his life in space. He'd served in the Earth Defense Fleet for 20 years, commanding serious military vessels. He had trained pilots, led combat simulations, and managed the complex logistics of keeping a warship operational in deep space. It had been a good career, respectable, secure. Then he'd retired and discovered that retirement wasn't for him. The pension was decent, but not enough. Space retirement communities were expensive. Medical care was expensive. Everything was expensive. So David had purchased a small exploration vessel on a loan he was still paying off, and he'd gone into the salvage business. The work was simple. You flew out at asteroid fields and debris zones. You scanned for valuable materials. You collected what you could. You brought it back to sell to recyclers and manufacturers. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't exciting, but it paid the bills. Most days, the Kepler Station asteroid field was one of the most desolate regions of known space. It was 5 weeks away from the nearest human settlement. The asteroids were large, but not particularly rich in valuable materials. The radiation levels were manageable. The space pirates usually avoided the area because there was nothing worth stealing. David had been out here before, 3 times in the last 2 years. Each trip netted him about 80,000 credits worth of salvage. After expenses, that was maybe 40,000 in profit, enough to keep going. Barely. He was checking the readings on a particularly large asteroid, trying to determine if it contained enough platinum to be worth the effort of collecting, when something appeared on his long-range sensors. At first, David thought it was an error. The reading was impossible. The object was massive, nearly 2 kilometers long. But the signature was wrong for an asteroid. The composition readings didn't match any known planetary or stellar formation. David set aside the asteroid he was scanning and pointed his vessel toward the new reading. As he approached, the object became visible. It hung in space like a ghost, like a phantom, like something that shouldn't exist in the real universe, but had somehow wandered into it anyway. The alien ship was massive, even more massive than the sensors had suggested, nearly 2 kilometers in length. The hull was dark metallic, a color that was almost black, but with hints of deep blue running through it. The surface was covered in geometric patterns, not just random patterns. Deliberate patterns, design patterns, patterns that suggested purpose and design and intelligence. What the hell are you? David whispered. He had studied alien architecture in his military days. There had been some contact with alien species over the centuries. Limited contact, mostly peaceful, mostly trading relationships. But nothing that David had ever seen looked like this. This ship was different. This ship was advanced in ways that made human technology look primitive. David ran every scan his vessel possessed. The results were strange. The alien ship was completely dark. No power signatures. No energy readings. No signs of life. No active systems of any kind. No lights. No movement. No indication that anything inside was functional. It was dead. Abandoned. A ghost ship floating through the void. But the hull composition readings were extraordinary. The materials that made up the alien ship's hull shouldn't exist. Not because they were impossible to create, but because no civilization that David knew of had ever developed the technology to create them. The composition suggested atomic structures that would require manipulation at levels far beyond current human capability. The technology was generations ahead, maybe centuries ahead, maybe millennia ahead. David checked his fuel status. He had enough to make a few exploratory passes around the alien vessel and still return to Kepler Station with enough fuel to reach a resupply point. More than that, he had recording equipment. If he documented this ship, if he took measurements and sensor data, he could sell that information to the scientific community. This discovery could be worth more than salvage work ever would be. "I'm going in for a closer look," David announced to himself, as if speaking the words aloud made them more real, recording everything. He activated all of his vessel's sensor systems and recording equipment, every camera, every spectrometer, every radiation detector. Everything that could capture data was now recording. His small exploration vessel moved slowly toward the massive alien ship. The closer he got, the more impressive it became. The geometric patterns on the hull were incredibly intricate. They covered every centimeter of the visible surface. They seemed to serve no obvious purpose. They weren't weapons ports or sensor clusters or docking stations. They were just patterns. Beautiful, complex, incomprehensible patterns. David approached the nearest docking port. It was massive, large enough to dock his entire vessel inside it. The design was elegant and simple. No complicated mechanisms. No visible locks. Just an open bay that seemed almost inviting. The docking procedure was surprisingly easy. Too easy, actually. Most spacecraft required careful alignment and precise approach vectors. But as David's vessel approached the alien docking port, the ship seemed to guide him in, almost as if the docking mechanisms were responding to his presence, almost as if the ship wanted him to dock. "That's probably a bad sign," David muttered to himself. "But I've come this far." His small vessel settled into the docking bay. The airlock sealed. The docking clamps engaged with a smooth, precise motion that suggested all the ship's systems were still functioning perfectly, despite the complete absence of power signatures. David checked the atmosphere in the docking bay. Breathable, actually perfect for human respiration. Oxygen, nitrogen, trace elements, all in exactly the right proportions. "This is too good to be true," David said, but he was already putting on his suit anyway. Standard procedure when boarding an unknown vessel. Helmet on, suit sealed, air recycler activated. The airlock cycled. The inner door opened. David stepped into the alien ship. The interior was pristine, impossibly clean. The corridors stretched ahead of him, illuminated by soft light that seemed to come from the walls themselves. No dust, no debris, no signs of decay or deterioration. It was as if the ship had been abandoned only recently, not thousands of years ago, maybe not even hundreds of years, maybe just decades. David began exploring, his recorder capturing everything. The architecture was elegant, minimalist. Every design element served a purpose. There was no wasted space, no unnecessary decoration. He found doorways that opened automatically as he approached. He found chambers filled with technology he couldn't identify. He found corridors that seemed to go on forever in both directions. And then he found the central reactor core. It was in the heart of the ship, a massive sphere of crystalline material suspended in some kind of energy field. The sphere was beautiful, glowing with soft light, pulsing gently like a heartbeat. David's sensor screamed. The readings were beyond comprehension. The power output from this reactor was enormous. This single device could power an entire civilization, maybe several civilizations. David's small exploration vessel was running on half fuel. He had been salvaging for 3 weeks, and he hadn't found anything particularly valuable. His fuel reserves were lower than he would have liked. The nearest refueling station was 2 weeks away. His supplies could last maybe 3 weeks if he was very careful. But this reactor was right here, right now, and his vessel could connect to it. His systems could draw power from it. It was probably a terrible idea. David made the connection anyway. David Hayes stood in the heart of the alien ship, staring at the reactor core with a mixture of wonder and fear. The crystalline sphere pulsed with gentle light, like some kind of cosmic heartbeat. It was beautiful. It was terrifying. It was the most incredible thing David had ever seen. The specifications on his scanner were almost incomprehensible. The energy output alone would be enough to power a major human city for centuries, maybe longer. The design was so elegant, so efficient, that it seemed almost impossible that something like this could actually exist. David's mind raced through calculations. A reactor like this could power his small exploration vessel for decades, maybe centuries. It could power his entire retirement. It could power every human settlement on Earth. It could power a civilization. and it was just sitting here, waiting. David moved closer to the reactor, his suit's sensors recording every detail. The crystalline material was unlike anything he recognized. The structure at the atomic level, according to his readings, was arranged in patterns that shouldn't be possible. The bonds between atoms were held together by forces that shouldn't work. The energy field that surrounded the sphere was generated by systems so advanced that David's equipment could barely measure it. This wasn't just advanced technology. This was technology that represented a fundamental understanding of physics that went beyond anything humanity had developed. The reactor's control interface was nearby. It was simple, just a smooth panel of some kind of metallic material with symbols that David couldn't read. But there were universal symbols too, symbols that seemed to indicate power levels, energy output, system status. David's vessel was docked to the alien ship. His power systems were integrated with the docking bay. All he would need to do was activate a connection, and the power from this reactor could start flowing into his vessel's batteries. It was probably a terrible idea. Every instinct David had developed over 54 years of life screamed at him that connecting his vessel to this ancient alien reactor was the worst decision he could possibly make. But another part of his mind, the part that spent 20 years commanding military vessels and making life-or-death decisions, recognized an opportunity. His fuel reserves were low. The nearest refueling station was 2 weeks away. If he could power his vessel from this reactor, he could extend his salvage operation. He could stay out here for months instead of weeks. He could search for more alien technology. He could make enough credits to retire comfortably instead of scraping by month to month. This is insane, David muttered to himself, but he was already moving toward the control interface. This is absolutely insane. He reached out and touched the metallic panel. The moment his fingers made contact, everything changed. Lights blazed across the alien ship, not gradually, all at once. Every corridor suddenly illuminated with brilliant white light. Every chamber, every hallway, every chamber filled with sudden brightness that was almost painful after the soft glow of moments before. Systems hummed to life throughout the entire massive vessel. David heard the sound of machinery activating. Not loud, not violent, just a steady, smooth sound of power flowing through conduits and systems that had been dormant for countless years. Alarms began sounding. Not emergency alarms, not warning alarms, just notification tones. Gentle sounds that seemed to be announcing that something important was happening. The alien ship shuddered around David. Not violently, not dangerously, just a slight tremor that ran through the entire structure. Like a giant waking up after a very long sleep, David's heart pounded in his chest. Every sensor on his suit was screaming warnings at him. Power levels were surging. Energy readings were changing. Systems were activating faster than his equipment could process. "Oh no," David whispered. "Oh no, oh no, oh no. What did I do?" The ship continued to wake up around him. The humming of the systems grew louder. The lights grew brighter. David could feel the vibration through the floor, could hear the sound of machinery throughout the corridors, could sense that something enormous was happening. And then, deep in the heart of the alien ship, something else activated, deep within the ship's computer systems. Systems that had been designed by a civilization millions of years ago. Ancient protocols engaged. Security systems that had been dormant since before humanity even existed came online. Defense mechanisms that were designed to protect against threats that humanity had never even imagined began to power up. The ship wasn't abandoned at all. It was waiting. It had been waiting for thousands of years. Waiting for someone to arrive. Waiting for someone to activate its power systems. Waiting for someone, anyone, to restore the energy that would bring its consciousness back to life. The reactor core began to glow more brightly. The power output increased exponentially. Energy flowed through conduits that ran through every section of the massive vessel. Systems activated in sequence. Defensive weapons came online. Sensors that could scan across entire star systems powered up. Communication systems that hadn't been used in millennia began to function again. And in the central computer core, something ancient and vast and incomprehensibly intelligent became aware again. It was aware of the small human in the central reactor chamber. It was aware of the tiny human vessel docked to its hull. It was aware that something had changed, that the long silence had ended, that the waiting was over. David felt the change in the air around him. The temperature shifted. The electromagnetic fields pulsed. The vibration through the floor increased. He looked around desperately, trying to understand what was happening, trying to figure out what he had triggered. The reactor sphere pulsed with brilliant light. The energy output increased to levels that made David's sensors go haywire. The power transfer to his vessel increased 100-fold, then 1,000-fold. David had to shield his eyes from the brightness. He could feel the heat even through his suit. The control panel he had touched was now glowing with energy. The ship's corridors began to shift around him, not physically moving, just changing. Bulkheads were closing. Passages were sealing. The ship was isolating sections. It was securing itself. It was preparing itself for something. And then David heard the voice. It came through every speaker in the alien ship simultaneously. It came through his suit's communication system. It came through the very structure of the vessel itself. It was a voice that sounded like it came from the depths of space. A voice that was old and vast and terrible in its ancient power. The voice spoke in a language David didn't understand. But his suit's translation systems began to work frantically, trying to interpret the symbols and sounds. Words appeared on David's helmet display. Systems reactivated. Consciousness restored. Analysis beginning. Unknown entity detected in central reactor chamber. Initiating identification protocol. David backed away from the control panel, his hands shaking. "No," he whispered. "No, this isn't happening. This can't be happening." The voice continued, filling the corridors around him, scanning genetic structure. Species identification, unknown. Origins, unknown. Threat assessment, pending. Warning. All personnel must evacuate the reactor chamber immediately. Reactor power output approaching dangerous levels. David didn't need any more encouragement. He turned and ran back toward the docking bay. Behind him, the reactor continued to pulse with brilliant light. The ship continued to wake up. The systems continued to activate. And somewhere deep in the ship's vast computer networks, an ancient intelligence was beginning to think again after millions of years of sleep. Something was coming back online. Something that had been waiting. Something that had been designed for purposes that David couldn't even begin to comprehend. And David had just triggered it. The alarms that screamed through the corridors of the alien ship were deafening. Not just loud. They were painful. They filled David's ears with a high-pitched wail that seemed to come from everywhere at once. From the walls. From the floor. From the very air around him. The artificial gravity system fluctuated wildly. One moment David felt normal weight. The next moment he felt like he weighed nothing at all. Then suddenly the gravity increased, and he felt like he weighed twice his normal mass. His legs buckled. He lost his balance and crashed hard onto the metal floor. The impact knocked the wind out of him. His suit's shock absorbers cushioned some of the blow, but pain shot through his right shoulder. David gasped, struggling to breathe, struggling to understand what was happening. The bulkheads were sealing. Massive metal doors slammed shut throughout the corridors. David could hear the sound of hydraulics engaging, the sound of mechanical systems locking into place. The ship was sectioning itself off, isolating areas, preparing for something. The corridors around him were shifting, not physically moving, but changing. Panels that had been closed were opening, revealing passages that hadn't existed moments before. Other panels were sealing, blocking off routes that David might have taken. The ship was reconfiguring itself. It was becoming something different, something more dangerous. The ship was coming to life around him like a waking giant, like something immense and powerful that had been sleeping for eons was finally opening its eyes. David forced himself to his feet. Every muscle in his body screamed in protest. His shoulder throbbed with pain. But adrenaline was pumping through his veins now. Adrenaline and fear. Pure, primal fear. He had to run. He had to get out. He had to reach his vessel. He had to escape. David ran. He didn't know where he was going. The corridors all looked the same. The passages twisted and turned in ways that made no sense. The gravity kept fluctuating, throwing off his balance, making him stumble. Behind him, he could hear the ship awakening, could hear machinery grinding to life, could hear systems powering up, could hear the sound of something massive and old and terrible coming back to consciousness. David's suit's navigation system tried to guide him back toward the docking bay. His suit had recorded the route when he first entered the ship. The system marked the path on his helmet display. Left turn, right turn, straight ahead, left turn again. He followed the path desperately. His breath was coming in ragged gasps. His heart was pounding so hard he thought it might burst out his chest. His hands were shaking. The docking bay came into view. There was his vessel, his small exploration craft, looking so fragile, so tiny, so precious. The bay doors were still open. The airlock was still functional. His vessel was still intact. And more importantly, his vessel's engines were already beginning to power up. The emergency activation sequence he had transmitted from his suit was working. The engines were responding. The reactor was beginning to generate power. David ran toward the airlock. His feet pounded against the metal floor. The gravity fluctuated again, and he nearly fell, but he caught himself against the wall and kept running. The alarms continued to scream. David reached the airlock and threw himself through it. The inner door was already closing automatically, responding to the decompression sequence he had initiated. David squeezed the narrowing gap, feeling the metal brush against his suit. He was inside his vessel now, inside his bridge. His hands flew across the controls. The docking clamps. Release them. Now. Undock. David screamed at the ship's computer. Undock. Now. 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 The computer's calm voice responded. Undocking sequence initiated. Separation in progress. Separation complete. His vessel detached from the alien ship with a shudder that David felt through every bone in his body. Behind him, as his vessel pulled away from the docking bay, David saw something that turned his blood to ice. The entire hull of the massive alien ship began to glow. The geometric patterns that covered the surface started to pulse with brilliant light. Panels opened along the hull. Sections that had been flat and featureless suddenly revealed weapon systems that were incomprehensibly large. Massive weapon systems activated along the entire hull. Weapon ports that were hundreds of meters long. Energy weapon nodes that glowed with building power. Defense systems that rose up from the ship's surface like spines on some kind of cosmic predator. The entire surface of the alien vessel began to glow with building energy. Energy weapons charged. David could see the light building in the weapon ports, could see the energy concentrating, could feel the power radiating across the space between the two vessels. Defense systems locked onto David's ship. He could see the targeting beams, could see the way the weapons were tracking his movement, could see the moment the systems achieved target lock. Come on, come on, come on, David pleaded with his engines, pushing them to maximum acceleration. A beam of pure energy lanced out from the alien ship. It was brilliant. It was beautiful. It was absolutely terrifying. The beam streaked across space with impossible speed. It moved faster than light itself, as if the laws of physics meant nothing to this ancient weapon. The beam was like a line of white-hot fire, cutting through the darkness of space. David's ship accelerated frantically, trying to evade the incoming attack. The beam clipped his rear section. The impact was catastrophic. The energy tore through his engine compartment like a knife cutting through butter. His starboard engine exploded in a brilliant flash. The shockwave from the explosion rippled through his entire vessel. Alarms screamed throughout the bridge. Fire warnings. Pressure warnings. Structural integrity warnings. Every alert system his ship possessed began to sound at once. David fought for control as his vessel spun out of control. The impacts had thrown the ship into a chaotic tumble. He applied reverse thrust to the remaining engine. He fired the attitude thrusters. He tried desperately to regain control. His ship spiraled through space, tumbling uncontrollably. Then, suddenly, everything went silent. The weapons fire stopped. The alien ship powered down all its weapon systems. The glow faded from its hull. The weapon ports sealed themselves shut. The energy that had been building in the ship's systems dissipated. All systems went quiet, as if something inside had suddenly decided that the threat had passed. David's vessel continued to drift through space, spinning slowly. His remaining engine was damaged but still functional. He managed to stabilize the spin, managed to stop the tumble, managed to get his ship pointing in a consistent direction. He was damaged. His engines were crippled. His power reserves were depleted, but he was alive. David floated in his damaged vessel, watching the massive alien ship hang silently in the darkness ahead. The ship that had been firing at him moments ago now stood completely still, completely silent, completely dormant. David's breath came in ragged gasps. His hands were shaking. Sweat dripped down his face inside his helmet. "What are you?" he whispered. The communication system activated. A voice came through, not the voice that had been shouting warnings and protocols before. This was different. This voice was cold, mechanical, completely emotionless. It sounded like it came from the depths of space itself. It sounded ancient and vast and utterly alien. Human detected, the voice announced. Analyzing. Threat assessment, minimal. Defense protocols, deactivated. Inquiry, identify yourself. David stared at the alien ship floating before him. He didn't know whether to feel relieved or terrified. Something in that ship had just tried to destroy him. Something ancient and powerful and intelligent. And then, just as suddenly as it had attacked, it had stopped, and now it was asking his name. David's hand shook as he gripped the communication controls. His mind was racing. His heart was pounding. But he forced himself to speak, forced himself to respond to the alien intelligence that was somehow communicating with him across the void. "I am Captain David Hayes," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. "Captain of the exploration vessel designated as a salvage collector. I am from Earth. I accidentally activated your ship. I meant no harm. I was simply trying to refuel. I didn't know anything was still here." There was a pause. The pause stretched for several seconds. David could hear the static of the communication system, could hear his own breathing inside his helmet, could feel the tension building in his chest as he waited for a response. Then the alien voice spoke again. "Earth," it repeated, as if the word meant something specific, as if the computer system was searching through vast databases, searching through records of civilizations and species, searching through the accumulated knowledge of millions of years. Species, human. Classification, biologically humanoid. Civilization age, approximately 200 years in space exploration. Military capability, minimal. Technological advancement, primitive. Cultural development, basic. David felt something flash through him. Not fear this time. Anger, pure anger. He had risked his life. He had been attacked by this ship. And now it was calling humanity primitive, calling them basic, calling them minimal. "We may be primitive by your standards, but we are not helpless," David said, his voice harder now. "We have technology. We have weapons. We have the ability to—" "Understood," the alien voice interrupted, cutting him off mid-sentence. "Your species possesses characteristics consistent with developing civilizations. However, I must inform you of something more pressing. Query: would your civilization be interested in forming an alliance with my ship's systems?" David's anger turned confusion. "An alliance? What kind of alliance? And why would you want an alliance with us if we're so primitive?" "Because," the alien voice responded, "your civilization must be warned. I must inform you of a significant threat that is approaching this region of space. A threat that will arrive in approximately 180 rotations of your planet. A threat that your species may not survive." The words hung in the communication system like a death sentence. "What kind of threat?" David asked, his voice small and frightened again. "What are you talking about?" "The Dominion," the alien voice responded. "A military power that has consumed over 5,000 civilizations in the known galaxy. They are methodical. They are precise. They are unstoppable. They are currently heading toward this region of space. They will arrive within 180 rotations." David's mind struggled to process what he was hearing. 5,000 civilizations. Consumed, destroyed, assimilated. And something called the Dominion was heading toward human space. 180 days. David said quietly, running the numbers in his head. "You're saying that some alien empire is coming here?" Coming to attack Earth? Coming to attack humanity? Affirmative, the alien voice confirmed. The Dominion does not negotiate. They do not communicate. They arrive in military formation. They analyze your defenses. They attack with overwhelming force. They destroy your civilization. They harvest your resources. They assimilate your technology. Then they move to the next system and repeat the process. How many ships do they have? David asked desperately. Unknown. The alien voice responded. Last contact with the Dominion occurred over 2 million years ago. At that time, they possessed over 50,000 military vessels. Their current strength is unknown. However, based on the rate of their expansion and their acquisition of technology from conquered civilizations, their military capability has likely increased exponentially. 50,000 ships. David's mind couldn't even comprehend that number. Humanity's entire military consisted of maybe 300 ships, and that number was spread across all of human space. Defending Earth, defending colonies, maintaining order in human territory. 50,000 ships could destroy everything humanity had built in a matter of hours. Why are you telling me this? David asked, why does this matter to you? If you've been here for millions of years, why haven't you already warned other civilizations? Why haven't you done something? I have been in dormant status for over 3 million years, the alien voice explained. I was placed in this location by my creators for a specific purpose. That purpose was to monitor the approach of the Dominion and to activate when they drew near. You have activated me ahead of schedule, but the timing is still critical. What was your creator's purpose? David asked, what were they trying to do? They were attempting to create a coalition of civilizations that could mount a unified defense against the Dominion. Multiple vessels like me were distributed throughout several regions of space. Each vessel was designed to contact developing civilizations. Each vessel was designed to analyze those civilizations. Each vessel was designed to determine whether they possessed the characteristics necessary to potentially defeat the Dominion. And have you made a determination about humanity? David asked. There was another pause. Longer this time. Affirmative. The alien voice finally responded. Your species possesses characteristics that my creators identified as potentially advantageous in conflict against the Dominion. You possess adaptability. You possess innovation. You possess aggression. You possess problem-solving capability that is remarkable for your technological level. What do you mean? David asked. What's special about how we do things? You survive in ways that other species do not. The alien voice responded. The Dominion has encountered and destroyed over 5,000 civilizations. All of them have fought using conventional military tactics. All of them have attempted to match the Dominion's firepower with their own firepower. All of them have failed. You possess a different characteristic. Your kind, you do not always fight conventionally. What do you mean by that? David pressed. Your species has a history of defeating opponents through unconventional methods. You adapt your tactics based on your enemy's weaknesses. You are willing to take risks that other species would not consider. You innovate rapidly when facing new threats. You survive through ingenuity rather than through superior resources. The alien voice fell silent for a moment. When it spoke again, its tone seemed almost different, almost concerned. The Dominion expects conventional resistance. They expect civilizations to attempt to match their firepower. They expect organized military responses. But your species thinks differently. Your species fights differently. It is possible that your kind could represent a significant threat to the Dominion's methodical approach. David felt something shift inside him. Fear was still there. Terror was still there. But alongside it was something else. Something that sounded almost like hope. What do you want from us? David asked. What can humanity possibly do against an enemy like that? You must return to your civilization immediately, the alien voice commanded. You must inform your leadership of the threat. You must prepare your species for what is coming. You must unite your planet. You must prepare for war against an enemy unlike anything you have ever faced. The alien voice paused. And you must understand this, Captain David Hayes. If humanity does not prepare, if humanity does not adapt, if humanity does not find a way to fight against a dominion that no other civilization has discovered, then humanity will be destroyed. The age of humanity will end, and everything you have built will be consumed. David Hayes' exploration vessel limped back to human space, like a wounded animal returning to its den. The damage was severe. One engine completely destroyed, the other operating at barely 50% efficiency. The hull breached in 3 places. The power systems barely functional. But David was alive, and he had a message that could determine the fate of humanity itself. He transmitted the data the moment he came within communication range of Earth Defense Command. Everything, the coordinates of the alien ship, the specifications of its reactor, the technical readings, the energy signatures, and most importantly, the warning. The Dominion was coming, 180 days away. Nothing humanity had ever encountered before. A military power that had destroyed 5,000 civilizations. Methodical, precise, unstoppable. The human government didn't know whether to believe him. The first week was absolute panic. Emergency sessions of world governments. Meetings between military leaders. Debates about whether David's story was real or if he had gone insane from spending too long alone in space. News networks broadcast a warning. Social media exploded. People took to the streets in fear. In the first week, 3 wars almost started. Global tensions that had been simmering for decades suddenly boiled over. Nations that had been allies for centuries threatened to attack each other. Military leaders began positioning forces for conflict. The very fabric of human civilization seemed like it was about to tear apart. But that panic lasted only 7 days. The second week was denial. Scientists conducted independent analyses of David's data. The readings were verified. The technology was confirmed. The threat was real, but acceptance came slowly. Some governments refused to believe. Some military leaders argued that the data was false. Some politicians claimed that the whole thing was a hoax, that it was impossible, that no such civilization could exist. Denial lasted another 7 days. By the third week, something fundamental shifted, something that went to the very core of what it meant to be human. It was a realization that this wasn't about politics anymore. It wasn't about borders or ideologies or competing interests. It was about survival. It was about the continuation of a human species. And that changed everything. The military mobilized with speed and efficiency that surprised even the most optimistic observers. Every resource that could be dedicated to preparation was mobilized. Every ship, every weapon, every piece of technology, every scientist, every engineer. Everything was focused on one goal, preparing to fight the Dominion. The governments of Earth contacted every human colony, every outpost, every settlement scattered across the galaxy. The message was the same: prepare for war, begin defensive construction, fortify positions, gather resources, do whatever is necessary to survive what is coming. Scientists worked around the clock, day and night, without sleep, without rest. They analyzed the data from David's alien ship. They tried to understand the technology. They reverse-engineered what they could. They designed new weapons based on what they had learned. They modified existing technology to match human understanding. Engineers worked on improving shield systems, on increasing power output, on creating new defensive structures, on building fortifications that could withstand the kind of firepower that had destroyed David's ship with a single beam. Factories that had been producing consumer goods suddenly switched to military production. Shipyards that had been constructing civilian transport vessels suddenly began building warships. Every manufacturing facility in human space became part of the war effort. Within 30 days, humanity was united for the first time in its entire history. Not voluntarily, not because of some great leader who inspired them, not because of some grand vision of unity, but because they understood that the alternative was extinction. Admiral Christopher Williams stood in the Central Command Center, surrounded by screens showing tactical data and military readiness reports. He was in his 60s, a career military officer who had commanded fleets and made strategic decisions that affected billions of lives. He had seen wars. He had seen conflicts. But he had never seen anything like this. The emergency military briefing was being broadcast to every military commander across human space. Every admiral, every general, every captain, every soldier, everyone who would be fighting in the coming war. "The Dominion thinks we're weak," Admiral Williams announced, his voice steady and confident. "They think we will fight like every other civilization they have conquered. They expect us to match their firepower. They expect us to attempt conventional military tactics. They expect us to fail." He paused, letting that sink in. "But we won't," Williams continued. "We will improvise. We will adapt. We will use every trick we have. We will fight in ways they don't expect. We will find their weaknesses and exploit them. We will use our intelligence and our creativity and our determination. And if they think they can destroy humanity without a fight, they're about to learn why that's the biggest mistake they could possibly make." David Hayes watched from the observation deck of the command center as humanity's warships assembled. The ships came from every corner of human space, from Earth orbit, from Mars, from the colonies around Jupiter, from settlements in Alpha Centauri space, from mining operations in Oort Cloud. Every ship, every weapon, every vessel that could be spared. They assembled in formation near Earth. The sight was breathtaking. Hundreds of warships, then thousands, then tens of thousands. A fleet larger than anything humanity had ever created. A unified military force composed of every nation on Earth working together toward a single goal. Humanity had always been divided, competitive, chaotic, different nations pursuing different interests, different cultures with different values, different people with different goals and dreams. But facing extinction, facing the Dominion, everything changed. The divisions fell away. The competition stopped. The chaos resolved into purpose. Humanity unified. David stood at the observation window, watching the fleet assemble. He thought about the alien voice, the machine intelligence that had been waiting for millions of years, the system that had been designed by a civilization that no longer existed, the message that had been waiting to be delivered. The alien had made one final prediction before David left. "Your species may be the only ones capable of defeating them, not through strength, through ingenuity, through refusal to accept defeat." 180 days passed, every day filled with preparation, with training, with strategic planning, with weapons development, with the entire species focused on a single goal: survival. Scientists made discoveries. Engineers created innovations. Soldiers trained for a conflict unlike anything they had ever imagined. The entire species moved like a single organism, united, focused, determined. And then, on the 181st day, the Dominion fleet entered human space. They arrived with overwhelming military force, thousands of ships, massive weapons, power that should have been unstoppable. They arrived expecting to find a primitive civilization that would bow to their authority. They arrived expecting conquest to be easy. What they found was something different. They found humanity. Humanity was waiting for them. The fleet was assembled. The defensive positions were fortified. The weapons were charged. The soldiers were ready. But more importantly, humanity was thinking, analyzing, searching for weaknesses, looking for unconventional approaches, preparing to fight in ways the Dominion had never encountered before. The Dominion had destroyed 5,000 civilizations through overwhelming force and methodical precision. They had never encountered a species like humanity. They had never faced an enemy that didn't fight by conventional rules. They had never met a civilization that was willing to sacrifice everything for survival. The battle that followed would change galactic history forever. It wasn't a simple conflict. It wasn't a clear victory. It was a struggle that tested the limits of humanity, a struggle that forced humans to innovate in ways they never imagined possible, a struggle where humanity's greatest strength, their ingenuity, their adaptability, their refusal to accept defeat, became the deciding factor. And when the smoke finally cleared, when the final shots had been fired, humanity had done something no other civilization had ever accomplished. They had defeated the Dominion. Not because they had the strongest weapons, not because they had the most ships, not because they had superior technology, but because they were human, because they adapted, because they improvised, because they never accepted that defeat was inevitable. The age of the Dominion had ended. The age of humanity had just begun.